My husband bruised my face last night. But this morning, it wasn't just me waiting at that table. He walked into something he never saw coming. That's the line that keeps replaying in my mind, like the ticking of an old clock in a quiet room. And maybe that's why I'm finally ready to tell this story. My name is Vanessa Clark. I'm 52 years old, and right now I'm sitting at my dining room table with a split lip, a bruise blooming across my left cheek like some sick, twisted flower, and a silence so heavy it feels like it's pressing its hands around my throat. Before I go any further, if you've ever been hurt by the very man who promised to love and protect you, if you've ever stood in the dark with tears you couldn't let anyone see, go on and hit that like button. Tell me what city you're watching from, so I know I'm not alone. Because this one is going to hit deep. Last night, Terrence struck me. The back of his hand sharp and fast, like swatting away a fly. Only I wasn't a fly. I was his wife. 18 years of his wife. And I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't even cry, not until he was asleep, snoring like nothing had happened. I just stood there tasting blood, feeling the sting ripple across my cheek like someone had lit a match under my skin. I stared at him as he walked away, leaving me there like broken furniture someone intended to fix one day, but never quite got around to. But this morning was different. Terrence came down those wooden stairs, heavy footsteps, humming like he always did when he thought he owned the world. But the moment he turned that corner into the dining room, his face changed. The smile slid right off. Confusion. Then fear, real fear, flashed in his eyes. Because he didn't expect to see her sitting there, at the head of the table. Calm. Still. Watching him. And I'll tell you who she is soon. But first, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to the woman I used to be before I lost myself in the slow, quiet erosion of an 18-year marriage. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. The part of Charleston where the houses are older than the people in them. Pillars. Porches. Shutters that clap in the wind. Spanish moss hanging from the trees like ghosts that never learned how to leave. It's the kind of beauty that tricks you. Makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen in a place so picture-perfect. But bad things don't need ugly surroundings. They make their own ugliness inside your home. I've been a school librarian for 23 years. My days are filled with whispering children and the smell of old books. My whole life I surrounded myself with stories. Heroes and villains, queens and pauper girls, battles fought, battles won. Never in a million years did I imagine I'd become the woman whose story people listened to in disbelief. The woman with the split lip and trembling hands, trying to understand how her life turned into something she would have shelved under tragedy, in the fiction section. Terrence and I married late, me at 34, him at 36. We used to say we were each other's entire world. And that was the problem. When someone becomes your whole world, they also become the one who can destroy it. But let me tell you what this morning looked like, so you can see exactly why Terrence froze where he stood. I had set the table in a way I never had before. Not even on Christmas. Not even on our anniversaries. The wedding china. The white plates with gold trim so fine you were scared to blink too hard near them. Sat perfectly aligned. I ironed the white tablecloth my grandmother embroidered by hand. Every stitch made when she was still bright-eyed and strong. I laid out fresh gardenias from my own backyard, their scent soft and sweet, just like the bouquet I carried on my wedding day. And the food. Lord, I cooked like I was feeding a king before his execution. Cheese grits with sharp cheddar melted slow the way Mama taught me. Eggs whipped with cream until they were fluffier than clouds. Thick-cut bacon crisped right at the edges. Buttermilk biscuits tall enough to shame any restaurant. Homemade strawberry preserves. Fresh squeezed orange juice. It looked like love. It looked like devotion. But it wasn't. It was closure. It was clarity. It was the beginning of Terrence's reckoning. I set everything carefully, my lips still bleeding a little, my cheek throbbing in pulsing waves. I didn't put on makeup. Didn't try to hide the damage. I wanted Terrence to see exactly what he'd done. In daylight. But he still wasn't ready for who else saw. And when he rounded that corner and she lifted her eyes to meet his, he stopped breathing. The room went dead silent. Even the air seemed to step back. Because for the first time in 18 years, Terrence wasn't the one in control. And oh, how quickly a man changes when he realizes the person he thought would never fight back is suddenly sitting across from him with someone who knows every secret he prayed would stay hidden, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. This story started long before last night's bruise. Long before the slap. long before the whispering disrespect and the quiet, relentless emotional cuts he thought I never noticed. And if you're going to understand what happened at that table, you need to understand the woman I used to be. So let me take you back. Back to when Terrence wasn't a monster. Back to when I still believed in him. Back to when the first red flag appeared. Small, almost invisible, like a hairline crack in a glass that looks whole until pressure finally shatters it. This is where the real story begins. Before the bruise, before the begging, before the woman at the table who made my husband freeze like a guilty child. Before all of that, I was soft. Not weak. Soft. There's a difference. Weakness is when you can't fight. Softness is when you choose not to, because you still believe in the goodness of the person standing in front of you. And Lord knows, I believed in Terrence. I met him at a neighborhood cookout. Not the fancy kind, just a bunch of folks grilling chicken legs and talking loud enough for the whole block to hear. I was 32, wearing a sundress the color of peaches, holding a plastic cup of sweet tea. He walked up wearing a navy polo and that smile that made you think he'd never hurt a soul. That's the thing about men like him. They learn early how to hide their darkness behind a charming grin. Mind if I sit? He asked, even though there wasn't but one chair left and it was next to me. We talked for hours. Books. Music. Childhood. He laughed at my jokes. Listened to every word like it was gospel. Called me Ness from day one like he had the right. Women like me. We fall for men like that. Men who look at us like we're a soft place to land. And for a while it was good. Better than good. It was safe, warm, hopeful. He held my hand gently. He kissed my forehead like he was blessing it. He brought me flowers sometimes, store-bought but thoughtful. Told me he loved the way my voice softened at night when I was tired. Red flags don't show up in moments like that. They hide in the shadows of sweetness. It happened 3 months into our marriage. I was coming home late from the library. There had been a parent meeting about some book complaint nonsense. I walked through the door, kicked off my shoes, and before I could even say hello, Terrence turned to me with a look I'd never seen before. Cold. Cutting. Sharp like broken glass. "Where you been?" he asked. The tone wasn't worried. It was accusing. I laughed a little, confused. "I told you, I had that meeting. You could have called." "I did. I left a voicemail." Then the second crack. "So you just out here doing whatever you want? Not thinking about your husband?" My smile faded. Something in my stomach dropped. But I let it go. I brushed his arm and said, "Baby, I'm here now." He stared at me too long, then nodded slowly. It was the first time he made me feel like I'd done something wrong when I hadn't. It wouldn't be the last. People think marriages fall apart with explosions. Shouting matches, slammed doors, broken plates. But the worst ones, they fall apart quietly. Little comments. Little criticisms. Little shifts in tone. Terrence didn't hit me for years. Not once. Not even close. He chipped away at me instead. "You sure you want to wear that? That's how you're going to cook it? You're too emotional. You always make everything such a big deal. You talk too much. You talk too little. I'm the only one who really understands you. No man would put up with what I put up with." You don't realize someone is dimming your light until you wake up one day and can't remember the last time you shined. I stopped wearing bright colors. Stopped singing in the kitchen. Stopped writing poetry in my notebook. Stopped calling my sister. Stopped having opinions. Stopped being myself. He never had to tell me to shrink. I just did. It was 2 years before the slap. My niece, Aaliyah, had come to stay the weekend. She was 14, loud, funny, full of smart-mouthed energy that reminded me of myself at that age. Terrence never liked her. Said she talked too much. But she was a child, kids talk. One night, she dropped a glass in the kitchen. It shattered across the tile. She froze like the noise had frightened her. I rushed over saying, "It's okay, baby, don't move." But Terrence was already there. And his voice. My God, his voice. "Are you stupid?" he roared. Not yelled, not shouted. Roared. A 37-year-old man towering over a crying 14-year-old girl for breaking a glass. A glass. I stepped between them, my hands shaking. "She's just a kid. It was an accident." He looked at me the way a wolf looks at a deer. That was the first time I was afraid of him. He didn't hit anyone that night. But the monster showed its teeth. And once you've seen a monster's teeth, you never forget the shape. So now you understand why last night's slap wasn't a beginning. It was an ending. A climax. A consequence. Terrence walked into that dining room this morning thinking he'd see the same soft woman who always forgave, always folded, always took the blame. Instead, he found me, bleeding, silent, knowing, done. And across from me, sitting tall, steady, unshaken, was my older sister, Margaret. The one he'd spent years pulling me away from. The one he tried convincing me was bad influence. The one he told me didn't respect our marriage. The one he never wanted in this house. She lifted her eyes, slow, deliberate, and looked right at him. For the first time in 18 years, Terrence saw a woman he couldn't manipulate. And he knew that I had finally told someone the truth. The bruise, the hit, the years of control, the fear, the isolation, everything. And Margaret wasn't the type to sit quietly and let a man get away with anything. Her voice was low when she spoke. "Sit down, Terrence." He didn't move, so she said it again, firmer. I said sit down. And the moment he finally dropped into that chair like gravity had doubled, I realized something powerful. This was the first time Terrence had ever been outnumbered. And the man who loved control had just stepped into the one room where he had none. Terrence sat down slowly, not because he wanted to, but because Margaret's stare didn't give him any other choice. My sister didn't look angry. She didn't look scared either. She looked steady, balanced, like a soldier who had been preparing for this moment long before the battle started. Terrence hated that. He hated when women weren't intimidated by him. The dining room wasn't large to begin with, but right then, with Terrence across from me, Margaret beside me, and the bruise on my face still purple and swollen, it felt like the walls were inching inward. Terrence's nostrils flared once. A small tell, his version of cracking knuckles. A warning that he felt cornered. "Vanessa," he said, trying to soften his tone. Why would you call your sister before talking to me?" My lips parted, but Margaret placed a hand gently on my wrist. A silent message. He doesn't get to talk to you like nothing happened. Let him speak to me. Terrence noticed the gesture, and something in his jaw twitched. Margaret leaned forward, elbows on the table. She didn't call me. Her voice was level, calm, deadly precise. "I came because I saw her at the store last night, with a bruise shaped like a man's hand." Terrence's eyes flicked to mine, searching, calculating. "Vanessa," he whispered, like a man trying to drag me back into the cycle. "You told her?" He sounded betrayed, wounded, like I had hurt him. Classic Terrence. "I didn't have to tell her," I said quietly. His gaze hardened. There it was. The real him. "What exactly are you two accusing me of?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Margaret didn't blink. "You hit my sister." "That's a lie." His voice was sharper now. Faster. Defensive. Typical abuser script. "You want to talk about lies, Terrence?" Margaret asked. I swallowed. My chest tightened. I could feel the tension like a storm rolling into the room. Terrence spread his hands, fake calm. "I would never hurt Vanessa. She's my wife." "Exactly," Margaret said. "And last night, you treated your wife like an object you owned." He scoffed. A nasty little laugh that I'd heard 1,000 times. "You don't know anything about our marriage." Margaret straightened her spine. "I know enough." Terrence turned back to me. "Baby, please." He reached across the table, palm open. Tell her what really happened." My hand stayed in my lap. He noticed. His smile faltered. Margaret spoke for me. "You can stop acting, Terrence. She's not alone anymore." There was a shift in the room. A small, electric twist in the air. Terrence's facade cracked. Just a little, but enough to reveal the fury simmering underneath. "You think," he said slowly, voice low, "you can come into my house and—" Margaret cut him off. "No, this is Vanessa's house. And I'm here because she's not safe with you." Terrence's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly. "You need to leave." "No," Margaret said calmly. "Sit down." He leaned over the table, towering, trying to intimidate her. But my sister, she didn't move an inch. It was the first time I'd ever seen Terrence realize intimidation wasn't going to work. Not today. Not with her. Not anymore. My voice felt like gravel. "Terrence, sit down." He froze. Not because I spoke, but because I didn't sound like the woman he was used to. I sounded tired. Done. Empty. He sat back down, reluctantly. I felt the words clawing their way up my throat. "You hit me." The silence cracked like thunder. Terrence's eyebrows shot up, feigning shock. "Vanessa." "No," I said louder. "You hit me. And I'm not pretending anymore." He blinked. Once. Twice. Then came the shift. The dangerous one. His voice lowered. "You pushed me." "I stumbled," I replied. You grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. You slapped me so hard my lip bled. And the only reason I didn't fall was because I caught the counter. His expression twisted. This is insane, he muttered. You're making things sound worse than they were bad, I snapped. Stop trying to rewrite it. Margaret placed her hand gently over mine. A grounding force. Terrence slumped back, rubbing his temples. He exhaled sharply. Fine, he said. Fine. I was angry. Everyone gets angry. That's not an excuse, Margaret replied. He glared at her. Stay out of this. She didn't flinch. No, his eyes flicked to me again. Look at what she's doing. She's turning you against me. I shook my head. You did that yourself. You're my wife. His voice cracked. Half fury, half desperation. I treated you like my priority, I said softly. And you treated me like your possession. He slammed his hand on the table. Not hard enough to break anything. Just hard enough to send a message. Margaret didn't even blink. You see that? She asked quietly. This. Right here. This is who he is. Terrence's voice dropped to a whisper. You're going to regret this, Vanessa. I felt my skin prickle. Margaret's voice dropped even lower. No. She's going to heal from this. Terrence stood again, slow, deliberate. Shoulders squared, chest puffed. A last attempt at dominance. We're not done, he said. We are nowhere near done. Margaret rose too, matching his height. You're right, she said. You're not done. Because in about 20 minutes, 2 officers will be knocking on this door. My breath hitched. Margaret, she squeezed my hand. You think I walked in here unprepared? She whispered. You think I didn't take photos? You think I didn't call for help before confronting a violent man? Terrence's face drained of color. You called the police? He whispered. Margaret nodded once. I'm not letting you hurt my sister again. Terrence's mouth fell open. Furious, frightened, speechless. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. And for the first time ever, Terrence looked afraid. Of consequences. Of exposure. Of losing control. Of losing me. The moment Margaret said the word officers, a strange stillness washed over the room. Not calm. Not peace. Just a heavy pause. Like the house itself was holding its breath. Terrence stood frozen, fingers curled, chest rising and falling too fast. He looked less like a husband now, and more like a cornered animal who'd finally run out of escape doors. His voice came out sharp and whisper thin. You called the police on me? Margaret didn't flinch. I called the police on what you did. Terrence looked between us. From her steady confidence to my bruised cheek. His eyes darted like he was trying to piece together a story fast enough to save himself. But, Vanessa baby. He took a small step toward me. I pushed my chair back. Not fast. Just enough. Enough for him to see that my body no longer trusted him. The look on his face, that little flash of humiliation, told me everything about the man he was when nobody watched him. The sirens outside weren't even close yet. Just faint echoes drifting through Charleston's morning quiet. But Terrence reacted like they were parked on the porch. He ran a hand over his head, pacing once, twice. This is insane, he muttered. All of this. You two are blowing things out of proportion. Margaret crossed her arms. You bruised her face. And she. He jabbed a finger toward me. She knows how to poke at me. She knows how to push. She stumbled, Margaret said flatly. You grabbed. You struck. You crossed a line. He whipped toward me. Tell her you didn't mean to make me angry. I didn't speak. Vanessa? His voice cracked. I looked at him. Right into him. And for the first time in 18 years, he couldn't hold my gaze. He tried a new tactic. The guilt route. The one that always worked on me before. You want to destroy our life over one argument? He placed a hand on his chest. Everything we built? Everything we are. Margaret scoffed quietly. Everything you built is control. Everything you are is fear. Terrence turned on her, fury flaring hot. You don't know AD. Finish that sentence, she warned. Go ahead. He stopped. Jaw tight, eyes flashing. I realized then. Terrence wasn't afraid of the police. Not really. He was afraid of losing the image he'd curated for years. The charming husband. The dependable community man. The man who always took care of his wife. Because the truth was simple. Terrence never cared about me. He cared about owning the version of me he built. He approached the table again, hands open like he was approaching a frightened animal. Vanessa, listen to me. I love you. You know I love you. None of it touched me. Because real love doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't taste like blood. It doesn't sound like footsteps you brace for. I whispered. Love doesn't hurt like this. Terrence swallowed hard. You're making a mistake. Margaret tilted her head. She's finally correcting one. The sirens grew louder. There was no more pretending. Terrence stepped back from the table. Shoulders tense. Breathing uneven. Do you really want police involved? He asked quietly. You want neighbors seeing that? Folks at church? Your job. I looked at him, steady. I want to be alive. Margaret reached for my hand again. Our fingers intertwined. Terrence tried the last strategy men like him always try. The soft voice. The remorse. The trembling lip. I didn't mean to hurt you, Ness. He wiped his eyes quickly, hoping we'd mistake anger for tears. I get overwhelmed. Work's been hard. Money's tight. Terrence, I interrupted softly. You hit me before money was tight. He froze. You grabbed me long before work was stressful. His jaw clenched. You raised your voice at me long before you were overwhelmed. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting there. And maybe he didn't. Because that woman, the one he knew, would have apologized for him hitting her. She would have begged him to understand her better. She would have promised to be more careful around his temper. But this woman at the table today, she was done dying in small ways. The sirens weren't faint anymore. They were right outside. Blue and red lights flashed across the lace curtains, turning my wedding china into shining, shifting patterns. Terrence closed his eyes like he had been stabbed. This is really happening, he whispered. Yes, Margaret said. He looked at me. Not angry now. Not raging. Just hollow. You're choosing them over me? I'm choosing me, I whispered. He flinched like the words burned him. A sharp knock shook the door. Charleston Police Department. My heart thudded so hard my ribs hurt. Margaret squeezed my hand again. It's okay, she murmured. You're not doing this alone. Terrence stared at the door, breathing fast. Fast like someone about to run. Or collapse. Another knock. Sir, ma'am, open up. Terrence turned to me one last time. You don't have to do this. I stood slowly. I already did. Margaret stepped forward and opened the door. 2 officers stood there. One male, one female. Both steady, calm, professional. The female officer's eyes flicked immediately to my face. To the bruise, to the split lip. To the way my hands trembled at my sides. She softened her expression. Ma'am, are you safe? Terrence let out a sharp breath behind me. Yes, I whispered. Now I am. The officers stepped inside. That's when Terrence broke. Not into tears. Not into apologies. Into anger. You have no idea what she's like, he snapped. She's dramatic. She exaggerates. The male officer lifted a hand. Sir, I'm going to ask you to calm down. Terrence scoffed. I am calm. But his voice was shaking. His fists weren't unclenching. The female officer approached me gently. Ma'am, do you want to file a report today? I looked at Terrence. For 18 years, that man taught me to survive him. To shrink for him. To silence myself for him. But today, I inhaled slowly. And nodded. Yes, I said. I do. Terrence's mouth dropped open. No. Vanessa, don't do this. Please. Don't do this. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in my marriage, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The moment I said, yes, I want to file a report, the air in the room changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Nobody screamed. Nobody flipped a table. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you feel in your bones. When a chapter of your life ends before you even realize it. Terrence stopped breathing for a second. Just froze. Hands open at his sides like someone had cut all his strings. The male officer stepped slightly between us, instinctively protective. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are. Terrence didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't speak. Just stared at me like he was witnessing his own downfall in real time. The female officer led me gently toward the living room couch. She sat beside me, giving just enough space for dignity. Ma'am, I'm Officer Lewis. I'll walk you through everything at your pace, okay? I nodded. My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped a rope around my words. Officer Lewis spoke softly. Can you tell me what happened last night? The question cracked something inside me. Because until that moment, I had never said the truth out loud to another soul. Not the full truth. Not the unvarnished edges. Not the part that made me ashamed even though it shouldn't. I opened my mouth. But for a second, all that came out was a trembling breath. Margaret sat in the armchair across from us, silent as stone. Her eyes locked on me like she was holding me up by sheer will. I tried again. He hit me. My voice sounded small. Smaller than I'd ever heard it. Officer Lewis nodded gently. With his hand? A closed fist? Something else? His hand, I whispered. The back of it. I looked down at my hands. My fingers knotted together so tightly they'd gone pale. Officer Lewis made a note. Was this the first time? My breath hitched. Terrence's voice exploded from the dining room. Don't lie, Vanessa. The male officer snapped his head toward him. Sir, you need to remain silent unless spoken to. Terrence paced once in a tight circle. His face flushed with humiliation. I closed my eyes. Spoke anyway. No, I said softly. It wasn't the first time. A silence dropped. Heavy. Ancient. Like the truth had finally stepped into the room with us. Terrence let out a strangled sound. Half laughter, half disbelief. Are you serious? You're doing this? You're trying to destroy me with lies. Margaret finally stood. Her voice carried that low, dangerous calm she only used when she was done being polite. She doesn't have to try, Terrence. You've destroyed yourself. His eyes were wild now. Wild in a way I'd only seen once before. The night he broke a picture frame because dinner was 10 minutes late. He pointed at me again. You know what she does? She pushes. She nags. She won't drop things. She gets in my face and then acts shocked when I react. Officer Lewis didn't look at him. She looked at me. Did you get in his face? I shook my head. I asked him why he was late. That's all. Terrence barked a bitter laugh. She makes everything sound so simple. Like she's innocent. She knows exactly how to push my buttons. Officer Lewis finally turned to him. That doesn't justify violence, sir. Terrence's mouth snapped shut. Terrence started pacing again. Hands on his hips, breathing like a man about to suffocate. Look, I'm frustrated, okay? His voice cracked. I work hard. I do everything for this house. For her. And this is what I get. Police in my home? My wife turning on me? He looked right at me. No one is going to believe you. His words were a whisper meant to slip under the officer's radar. But Officer Lewis heard. She lifted her head, sharp. Actually, sir, I believe her. He stopped cold. Something mean flickered in his eyes. Something he didn't bother hiding anymore. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. You think you know her, but you don't. She can't handle. Terrence, I said softly. He looked at me, annoyed at being interrupted. This isn't about what I can handle. I swallowed. It's about what I won't handle anymore. Officer Lewis continued gently. Did he threaten you? I nodded. Last night he told me I should learn my place. Margaret let out a soft gasp. Her fist tightened around the armrest. Officer Lewis wrote something quickly. Has he ever prevented you from leaving the house? Taken your money? Controlled your movements? Those questions. They weren't unfamiliar. They were the kind of questions you read on pamphlets in doctors' offices. And quietly think, that's not me, right? But they were me. I nodded again. He keeps our accounts separate, I said. He gives me an allowance. Says it's for budgeting. Margaret's jaw clenched. Officer Lewis looked up, concern clear. Has he ever broken anything during arguments? Thrown objects? I hesitated. And Terrence stupidly spoke up. Everybody breaks something sometimes. That doesn't mean. The male officer stepped closer to him. That's enough. Officer Lewis waited. I nodded. Yes. She scribbled more notes. Every word felt like peeling back a layer of my own denial. Terrence suddenly stopped pacing. He smoothed his shirt, straightened his back. Then he did what abusers do best. He switched masks fast enough to give whiplash. His voice softened. Almost tender. Vanessa, sweetheart, we can talk about this. We can fix this. Just tell them you're upset. Tell them you exaggerated. We can go to counseling. Baby, please. His voice cracked at the end. He looked like a man begging for oxygen. But it wasn't me he was begging. It was his reputation. His control. His pristine image as the good husband. I stared at him calmly. And in that moment, he realized the truth. The woman he broke last night wasn't the woman sitting on that couch today. Officer Lewis closed her notebook. Ma'am, based on your statement and the visible injuries, we will be filing a domestic violence report. Terrence exhaled sharply, shaking his head like he'd just heard a death sentence. The male officer stepped closer to him. Sir, I need you to stay right where you are while we discuss next steps. Terrence's voice rose in panic. Next steps? What next steps? The knock of finality entered Officer Lewis's voice. Terrence Clark, you will be temporarily removed from the residence while an emergency protective order is evaluated. Terrence blinked. What? No, 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 no. You can't kick me out of my own house. Officer Lewis looked him dead in the eyes. We can. And we are. His mouth fell open. The world he built on fear collapsed in one single morning. The house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a courtroom, one where truth had finally shown up late but determined. And justice walked in wearing a police uniform instead of a robe. Terrence stood frozen in the center of the living room, every vein in his neck visible, his eyes darting between the officers and me, like he was trying to map the exact moment his life slipped out of his hands. The male officer spoke first. Sir, we're going to need you to gather any essential items, wallet, phone, medications. Nothing else. Terrence stared at him like he'd just spoken in another language. You're kicking me out of my house, he said again, quieter this time. More dangerous. Officer Lewis didn't flinch. We're removing you for safety reasons. Terrence turned to me slowly. That slow, simmering turn of a man about to implode. You did this. His voice was low, trembling with restrained rage. After everything I do for you, everything I built, you think you can just erase me with a story? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Margaret stepped closer, barely an inch beside me, her presence a shield and a warning. The male officer stepped between Terrence and us. Sir, begin gathering your things. Terrence breathed out a sharp laugh. One of those laughs that aren't laughter at all, just pain wrapped in pride. He marched toward the hallway. Officer Lewis followed him, keeping a few paces back. Protocol. Safety. Margaret and I stayed in the living room. And for the first time all morning, the house exhaled. I sank into the couch, feeling my limbs turn heavy. Like everything I'd held up. All the fear, all the protecting, all the excuses. Finally slid off my shoulders and landed somewhere on the floor. Margaret knelt in front of me, her hands gentle on my knees. Breathe, honey, she whispered. You're doing the right thing. My chest trembled. A sob escaped before I could stop it. Why does it feel like I'm ruining his life? My voice cracked. Why do I feel guilty? Margaret cupped my chin, lifting my eyes to hers. Because you loved him, she said. Not because you wronged him. Her words broke something open. Not the pain. That had been open for years. It was the shame that finally cracked. The shame I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. Down the hallway, I heard drawers slamming, a closet door snapping, the thud of shoes hitting the floor. Every sound was sharp, chaotic. The sound of a man packing humiliation into a backpack. Officer Lewis's voice was steady. Just essentials, sir. I know what essentials are. Terrence barked. A beat of silence. Then the sound of him zipping his bag so aggressively. It echoed down the hall. The male officer in the living room stayed vigilant, eyes fixed on the hallway like he was waiting for movement. When Terrence finally emerged, he looked different, smaller, disheveled, like someone had taken a photograph of him and blurred the edges. His backpack hung off one shoulder. His keys were clenched in his fist. His eyes flicked to me, and for the first time that morning, there was no anger in them, just disbelief. How could you? He whispered. Not to me, but to himself. Officer Lewis stepped out beside him. All right, sir. We're escorting you to your vehicle. You will not re-enter the property. Terrence swallowed hard, throat bobbing. Can I talk to her? No, she said gently but firmly. His head snapped to me again. You're ruining us, he said, voice cracking. You're throwing everything away. I opened my mouth, closed it, then finally said the only truth left in me. No, Terrence. I'm saving myself. He flinched. Actually flinched. Like the truth hit harder than any slap he'd ever given. Officer Lewis nodded to her partner. Let's go. Watching Terrence walk toward the door felt unreal, like watching a movie of my own life, but not recognizing the person I'd been inside it. The male officer walked beside him, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid escalation. At the door, Terrence paused, fingers tightening on the strap of his bag. He looked back one last time. Not at me. At the house. At the life he thought he controlled. At the kingdom he'd built on fear, now crumbling at the threshold. He didn't say anything, just stared at the door frame, as if stepping through it meant he was stepping out of the version of himself he'd spent years performing. And then he walked out. The officers followed him. The door closed with a soft click. Not a slam. Not a bang. Just a quiet, almost gentle sound. The sound of freedom arriving. The sound of a new life beginning. The sound of a man losing his grip on a woman he never truly held. The silence afterward was huge. A silence I didn't recognize. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of holding my breath. A different silence. A silence with breathing room. Margaret rubbed my back slowly, her hand warm and steady. "It's over," she whispered. "At least the worst part." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny ember of strength glowed. Not fire yet, not a flame, but present, warm, alive. I wasn't the same woman who went to bed last night, and Terrence wasn't the man who lived here anymore. The moment Terrence's footsteps faded from the porch, my entire body finally reacted. My hands shook. My breathing stuttered. My knees felt like they couldn't hold me another second. Margaret caught me before I collapsed fully, guiding me to the couch like I was made of thin glass. "You're okay," she whispered, though my body didn't believe it yet. My mind was racing with all the old fears. "He'll come back. He'll find a way. He'll twist this somehow. He always does." I pressed a shaking hand to my chest. "It doesn't feel real," I croaked. "It feels like he's just outside waiting." Margaret knelt in front of me again, just like earlier, her steady presence grounding me. "He's gone," she said firmly. "And he's not coming back in this house. You have protection. You have evidence. You have us." Us. The word hit deep. A few minutes later, Officer Lewis and her partner came back inside. Their faces had softened. Less alert, more human. They removed their gloves, clipped their radios, and the room suddenly felt less like a crisis scene, and more like a place where something big had just shifted. "Ma'am," Officer Lewis said, taking a seat across from me. He complied. There were no issues. He left the property. My throat closed. Not because I didn't already know, but because hearing the words aloud felt like someone confirming a miracle. She continued gently. "We need to discuss next steps. Things that will protect you moving forward." I nodded, wiping my face. Her partner spoke next. "We're filing an immediate temporary protective order. It'll be active today. He cannot return here, cannot contact you in any way." I inhaled sharply. Like I hadn't taken a full breath in years, they handed me the paperwork. Forms, warnings, emergency numbers. But I wasn't looking at the pages. I was looking at my hands. They didn't look like the hands of someone who'd survived something. They looked like the hands of someone who'd just lost something. A life. A love. A future I thought I had. Margaret must have noticed the change in my eyes. "It's okay to grieve him, sweetheart," she said softly. "Even if he hurt you. Even if leaving him is the right thing." Tears burst out before I could hold them back. "It's like I'm breaking up with the man I hoped he was." I whispered. "Not the man he actually became." Officer Lewis nodded slowly. "That feeling is normal," she said. "Pain doesn't disappear just because danger leaves." The line hit me so deeply. I had to shut my eyes. Officer Lewis shifted her tone. "Not official now. Just human. I've done this job a long time," she said. "And women like you, the strong ones, you're always the last to see you're in danger." I looked up sharply. She smiled gently. "You think strength is staying. But real strength, the kind most people never reach, is leaving." My chest caved. A sob caught in my throat. She handed me a tissue, her eyes warm and steady. "You made the bravest decision a woman can make," she whispered. "You saved yourself." Before the officers left, they had me sign one more paper. I signed it with shaky fingers. But when I finished, something strange happened. I didn't feel shaky anymore. My signature looked like someone else's. Someone surer. Someone older. Someone who had lived through something. And survived. Officer Lewis walked toward the door. "If you need anything, anything at all, call us," she said. "No judgment. No hesitation. We're here." Then she opened the door and stepped outside. Light from the morning sun spilled into the living room. Warm and unreal. Her partner followed. They closed the door softly behind them. And for the first time in years, the house finally felt like mine again. Margaret sat beside me on the couch, her presence quiet but solid. For a long moment, we just sat there. No sirens. No shouting. No fear humming under the surface. Just silence. And then, slowly, painfully, beautifully, I took my first full breath. A breath without him in it. A breath that didn't shake. A breath that felt like a beginning. After the officers left and the house fell into that strange, fragile quiet, Margaret insisted I eat something. I told her I wasn't hungry. She ignored me, the way only old friends are allowed to, and placed a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hands. My fingers curled around the mug automatically, like they were remembering an old ritual. Warmth, comfort, stillness. For a moment, I thought maybe the day would end gently. Maybe the worst was behind me. But freedom, real freedom, always asks one more question. Before it fully arrives, are you ready to know the truth, even if it cuts deeper than the pain you've already felt? Because just as I was lifting the cup to my lips, my phone lit up on the table. Not a call, a notification, a bank alert. Margaret looked at the screen first. Then her face changed, a small tightening around her mouth, a flicker of disbelief. "Vanessa," she whispered, "you need to look at this." I leaned forward, still shaky, still tender, and read the message. $4, 800 withdrawal completed. My stomach dropped so hard. It felt like the floor disappeared under me. Another message. Then another. Then another. Transfer, $1,200 sent. Scheduled payment initiated, $900. 5, 6, 7 notifications. My bank account, our joint bank account, was draining in real time. My hands went cold. "He's taking everything," I whispered. He's emptying the account. My voice broke at the end. It wasn't just money. It was betrayal wearing a new mask. Margaret grabbed her phone, her tone sharp and steady, the opposite of what I felt inside. "Call the bank right now," she said. But my hands couldn't move. They felt like stone, like grief had solidified in them. Margaret snatched my phone and pressed it into my palm. "Vanessa, listen to me. You need to freeze the account. Right now." I stared at the shaking screen. "I didn't think he'd move this fast," I whispered. "My God, I didn't think he'd." Margaret cut me off gently. "Narcissists always move fast when their control is threatened." Her words hit me like cold water. This was control. Punishment. A final swing after the door had already closed. And it worked. For a moment, it worked. My body folded inward, my breath rushing out in one painful exhale. "He wants me to have nothing," I whispered. "He wants me to suffer for leaving." It took everything inside me to press that little green call button. Everything. My voice shook when the representative answered. I stumbled over my words, trying not to cry, trying to sound stronger than I felt. But halfway through explaining, my voice cracked wide open. The representative listened quietly, then said, "Mrs. Clark, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm freezing the account immediately." I shut my eyes, tears slipping out anyway. She continued, "We'll file a fraud alert, and you'll be protected. The transfers will be investigated." Fraud, protection, investigation. Words I never imagined needing. Words that felt unreal, but also like the very rope someone throws to a drowning person. When the call ended, I handed the phone to Margaret and leaned back against the couch. My chest hurt, not from fear this time, but from the slow unraveling of truth. Because Terrence hadn't just hit me. He hadn't just threatened me. He hadn't just belittled me. He had planned for this, prepared for it, expected me to fall apart the moment he stole the money. He thought money was my anchor. He thought he was my anchor. Margaret placed her hand over mine. "You're seeing him clearly now," she said. For the first time. Her voice was gentle, but the meaning burned. She was right. I had spent years twisting myself into someone smaller, so Terrence could appear larger. Years believing that loving him meant enduring him. But this theft, was the truth in its purest form. He was willing to destroy me, so he wouldn't have to face losing me. The tears kept falling, but something else rose beneath them. Quiet, steady, and powerful. Resolve. "I'm done," I whispered. The words surprised even me. I'm done letting him dictate the terms. I'm done being scared of what he'll do next. Margaret squeezed my hand. "That's it," she said softly. "That's the moment, Vanessa. Every woman who leaves has won. That moment when fear stops controlling the story." I nodded slowly. The fear was still there, but it wasn't steering the wheel anymore. My voice came out steadier this time. "I'm getting a lawyer. I'm documenting every withdrawal. He's not taking my life from me. Not anymore." Margaret exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. "That's my girl," she said, when she stood to get me more tea. I stayed on the couch, hands clasped together tightly, and silently, without ceremony or witness. I made myself a promise. I will not go back to him. I will not let him punish me for choosing myself. I will rebuild, even if I have to start from dust. I will come out of this with dignity, with strength, with my name intact. It was the first promise I'd made to myself. In a very, very long time. And for once, I believed every word. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a minute. I lay on Margaret's guest bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of her air conditioner, my heart beating like it was trying to remember what it meant to be free, and terrified at the same time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Terrence's face. Not the angry one, not even the one from last night, but the charming one, the version of him who brought me flowers at work, who held my waist at cookouts, as if I was the prize he'd chosen off the shelf, who whispered promises, as easily as breathing, lies all of them. And now, after draining that bank account, they felt even cheaper. By morning, my exhaustion was so thick. It sat on me like a blanket I couldn't push off. Margaret knocked softly on the door. "You up, baby?" I rose slowly. "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm up." Margaret had already brewed coffee. Not the store-brand stuff I kept at home for Terrence. The good stuff she saved for holidays. She sat at her dining table, with a manila folder in front of her. "This arrived for you," she said gently. "Delivered while you were resting." I frowned. "For me?" She nodded. I sat across from her, my chest tightening as she slid the folder toward me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a list of transactions from the past 6 months. Withdrawals I had never seen, transfers I never authorized, purchases I didn't recognize, all from our joint account, all signed under Terrence's name. My throat closed. Where did this come from?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Margaret hesitated. "This morning, after I dropped you off in the guest room. I called someone." I looked up slowly. "Who?" "Elaine." I stared. Elaine. My co-worker. My librarian partner in crime. And more importantly, her sister worked at the bank. "She pulled your last 6 months of statements," Margaret whispered. She said, "Vanessa's been stolen from for a long time." I covered my mouth with my hand. The room tilted. My breath shook. 6 months. 6 months of slow theft. 6 months of Terrence emptying the account a little at a time, like draining a bathtub without the water ever making a sound. He'd been planning for this. He'd been preparing for the day I finally stood up. Margaret squeezed my shoulder gently. "Baby," she said softly, "I think he's been expecting you to leave." My heart cracked open. Not because she was wrong, but because she was absolutely right. He'd always sensed that one day, the fear would stop working. At 10:30 that morning, we sat in a small law office downtown, one of those old Charleston buildings, with creaky wooden floors, and crown molding stained with years of humid summers. The lawyer, a calm, soft-spoken black woman named Attorney Marla Green, reviewed the papers silently for a long time. Her expression never changed, the kind of steady face that tells you, this is not her first time walking a woman out of the dark. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Clark," she said carefully, "your husband has been siphoning funds from your joint account for months. Quietly, intentionally, and strategically." I clenched my hands in my lap. Margaret leaned forward. "What does that mean for her case?" Attorney Green's eyes softened. "It means," she set the papers down, "this is not just domestic abuse. This is financial abuse, and it will strengthen everything we file." I swallowed hard. Financial abuse. The words felt too clinical, for something that had hollowed out my life. Attorney Green continued. "And because you documented the bruise, because the officers filed a report, because you already froze the account." She folded her hands gently. "Vanessa, you are not powerless here." Something in my chest loosened, the smallest sigh of relief. But then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "We need to discuss the house." The room went still. "The house?" I whispered. She nodded. "Has he ever threatened to remove your name from the deed? Or sell it? Or refinance without your consent?" My breath caught. Not because he'd done it, but because he'd threatened it. More than once. Attorney Green saw the shift in my face instantly. "Tell me," she urged softly. I stared at my hands. "He used to say," I whispered, "if you ever walk out that door, Vanessa, you walk out with nothing." Margaret's jaw tightened. Attorney Green nodded slowly. "That tells me something very important." "What?" I asked. She leaned forward, voice calm but edged with steel. It tells me he's been preparing to make you disappear from your own life for a long time. The words hit me so hard. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Not dramatic ones. Not loud ones. Quiet tears. The kind that come when someone finally says what you've been too afraid to admit. Attorney Green slid the documents back across the desk. Women married to narcissistic men, she said, don't usually leave until they've been stripped to their last ounce of strength. I blinked at her. She wasn't trying to offend me. She wasn't talking down to me. She was telling me the truth. All this time, she continued, you weren't staying because you were weak. She paused. You were staying because you were surviving. My breath trembled. I had never heard anyone reframe my suffering with that kind of dignity. And now, she smiled softly, your survival is turning into resistance. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart slowly filling with something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not shame, strength. Attorney Green reached into her drawer and pulled out a document, a protection order, not just a temporary one, a long-term one. We can file this today, she said. If you sign it. I stared at the line where my name belonged. The bruise on my cheek pulsed, like my body remembering every moment. It had begged me to leave. Long before my mind caught up, my hand moved slowly. Margaret placed her hand on my back, and with a breath so steady, it didn't feel like it belonged to the old me. I signed. The pen pressed a little too hard, and tore the edge of the paper. But honestly, it felt right. Some endings aren't meant to be delicate. When we stepped out of that office, the sun hit my face, warm and bright and startling. Margaret looped her arm through mine. How you feel? She asked softly. I took a slow breath. I searched for the word. I feel like my life just changed. She smiled. It did. We walked toward her car together. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim walking away from a marriage. I felt like a woman, walking toward her future. One painful, liberating, irreversible step at a time. The sky was turning soft gold as Margaret pulled into her driveway. One of those Charleston evenings where the heat finally lets go, and the breeze tastes like salt from the ocean. I stepped out of the car slowly. Not because I was tired, because for the first time in years, my body didn't know what it felt like. Not to be afraid to walk into a house, even if it wasn't mine. Margaret touched my hand. You don't have to be strong right now, she whispered. But I wasn't being strong. Not really. I was floating, like my soul was 10 steps behind my body, trying to catch up with everything that had happened. In the last 24 hours, we were halfway to her porch, when my phone buzzed. I knew who it was before I looked. Terrence. The name glowed on my screen, like a warning light on a machine. That's about to explode. Margaret inhaled sharply. You don't have to answer that. But I already had. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to hear what the new version of me sounded like. When she finally stopped being afraid, I lifted the phone to my ear. I didn't speak. Neither did he. Not at first. All I heard was his breathing. Slow, controlled, calculated. Vanessa. Just my name. Not shouted. Not growled. Not spit out like venom. Soft. Too soft. The kind of soft that used to pull me back. After every apology, every empty promise, every manipulated moment. But this time, it didn't touch me. I did not dissolve. I did not crumble. I did not shrink. I waited. He spoke again. They froze our account. The man had drained thousands of dollars from it, and still had the audacity to call it ours. I didn't respond. He continued. They said you filed something today. I could practically hear the anger boiling underneath his calm voice. The beast pacing behind a cage. He didn't know how to open anymore. I finally spoke. Yeah, I said softly. My voice did not shake. My lawyer filed it. Silence. Then a low, trembling exhale. You got a lawyer? Yes. He started to breathe faster. That's not necessary. We can talk. Just come home, baby. Let's fix this. There it was. The script. The same one he'd used every time. But I was no longer auditioning for that role. I swallowed, slow and steady. I'm not coming home. He made a sound. Half scoff, half laugh. Like I was a child making a joke. Vanessa, you're confused. You're tired. You don't know what you're doing. My jaw tightened. I know exactly what I'm doing. He went quiet. Not a good quiet. The kind where the temperature in a room drops 10 degrees. Even though no one moved. When he spoke again, His voice was colder. You think you're safe with that woman? I stiffened. That woman, he said again, has always hated me. She's filling your head with ideas. You would never do any of this on your own. Ah, there it was. The myth Terrence built his power on. If I ever left, it had to be someone else's idea. Because in his world, I was incapable of thinking for myself. I breathed deeply. This is my decision, Terrence. He inhaled sharply, like I had slapped him. Then, you're going to regret this. Not shouted, not screamed, whispered. And somehow, that whisper hit harder than a yell. I closed my eyes. No, I said softly. You're going to regret this. Then I ended the call. My hand trembled a little as I lowered the phone. Not from fear. From release. Margaret watched me carefully. You okay? I nodded. The truth was complicated. I wasn't okay. But I was becoming okay. She squeezed my shoulder. Come inside, baby. Let's get you settled. We stepped into her house. A warm place filled with plants. And the smell of lemon candles. The kind of environment that feels like it's hugging you. She'd made up the guest room again. Fresh sheets. A folded blanket. A lamp turned on. You need anything? She asked. I shook my head. But then I paused. Can you leave the door open a little? She smiled softly and nodded. Of course. She left the door cracked. Just enough for a sliver of light to slip into the room. I sat on the bed and let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. My entire marriage, the house settled into nighttime sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of wood, the distant cicadas outside. My phone buzzed once more. Not a call. A text. I looked. Terrence, you think this is over? I stared at the screen. And then I did something the old me would have never dared to do. I blocked the number. My hands shook, but not from fear. From victory. Small. Quiet. But monumental. I placed the phone face down on the bedside table. For the first time in years, the silence felt like safety. Not punishment. Not isolation. Just peace. A fragile peace. But mine. As I lay down, the last thing I thought wasn't Terrence. Or the bruise. Or the threat he whispered. It was something Attorney Green had said. Your survival is turning into resistance. I smiled faintly in the dim light. Resistance. I'd never seen myself that way before. But tonight, for the first time, I finally believed it. The next morning, the sunlight spilled into Margaret's living room like it had a secret to tell. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee in my hands, fingers wrapped around the warmth as if it could hold me together. Margaret's kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. It felt peaceful. Normal. Not like the life I had been trapped in, where every sound could herald chaos. I glanced at the phone. It buzzed. Another call from Terrence. I ignored it. For hours. Then, as the clock inched closer to noon, I realized something. I didn't want to hide. I didn't want to cower. I didn't want to wait for him to decide my fate. I was going to see him. Face to face. I parked my car a block from our home. I could see Terrence's SUV in the driveway. His car. He'd been waiting, no doubt, thinking he'd catch me afraid, flustered, begging. I walked up to the front porch slowly, each step measured. I heard the door open behind me. Terrence. He stood there, smiling at first. That casual, confident smile I had once loved. But the moment his eyes landed on me, it faltered. I didn't flinch. I didn't even acknowledge the bruise across my cheek. I didn't hide my lip that still throbbed from last night's collision. I met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Controlled. And in that moment, I realized that he was afraid. You came back, he said slowly, as if tasting the words for the first time. Yes, I said. Short. Precise. Controlled. Vanessa, we can talk about this, he tried, stepping closer. No, I interrupted softly, but with a weight that made him freeze. I'm not here to talk about us. What are you talking about? His voice had that edge now, the kind that betrays anger lurking just beneath the surface. I placed my hand on the mailbox post for balance, breathing slowly, letting the sun warm my bruised cheek. I'm talking about everything you've stolen from me. Our money, our home, our lives. I'm not asking. I'm taking it back. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder Elaine had helped me compile. I opened it slowly, letting the papers flutter in the light like flags of accusation. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I let the facts speak. The withdrawals. The unauthorized transfers. The purchases he thought I would never notice. His eyes widened, lips parted, and for the first time in years, he had nothing to say. "I've already contacted my lawyer," I said softly. "I've filed a protection order. I've frozen the accounts. And I've documented every single bruise, every single threat, every lie you ever told me." He swallowed. Then he laughed. A short, brittle laugh. You think this changes anything?" I tilted my head. "I know it does." The wind blew through the porch, rustling the papers like whispers of justice. Terrence didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even reach for me. He just stood there, his chest tight, his face pale under the hot sun. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized he was small, fragile, not because I made him so, but because the power he had used to control me was evaporating before his eyes. I stepped closer, not threatening, not angry, but resolute. "This is the last time I will ever let you hurt me, or control me, or make me feel less than I am. You hear me?" His jaw tightened. He nodded once, but I knew he hadn't fully absorbed it. It didn't matter. It only mattered that I had absorbed it. I turned and walked down the steps. Each step felt lighter. Each step felt like freedom. Terrence remained on the porch, staring after me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Margaret's car was waiting at the curb. I slid into the seat. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The city hummed around us. The traffic, the birds, the distant voices. All of it felt like a symphony of possibility. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a woman trapped by a marriage. I felt like a woman who had reclaimed her life. Later that night, I sat on Margaret's porch swing, the warm Charleston air brushing against my face. I thought of the bruise, the lip, the nights I'd cried alone. And yet, I smiled, because none of it had broken me. It had reshaped me, molded me, made me capable of standing in the light and saying, "I am free, I am whole, and I will not be silent again." The next morning, I woke early, sunlight spilling over Margaret's balcony, painting the wooden floor with golden streaks. Birds were chirping softly, but I didn't hear them at first. My mind was already moving, already calculating, already planning. Freedom didn't come from anger alone, it came from action. Margaret brought me coffee, black, just how I liked it, and set it on the small table between us. "You need to meet him today," she said softly, her eyes steady on mine. I nodded, stirring the coffee slowly. "I know," I said. "My lawyer said we need to finalize the filings before he can cause more trouble. Before he even thinks about the next move." Margaret didn't ask why I hadn't filed sooner. She didn't need to. She knew the pattern. The way fear had kept me paralyzed for months. Years. I took a long sip of coffee. The warmth spread through my chest, a quiet reminder that I was still alive. That I still had control over my body, my mind, my life. The law office smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood. The receptionist smiled politely as I walked in. I felt small, almost silly, wearing my simple blue blouse and black slacks, but I held my head high. Attorney Green came out a moment later. Tall, calm, methodical. The kind of presence that made you trust him immediately. "Vanessa," he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you. Ready to take the next step?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. "More than ready." He guided me into his office. We sat. He opened the file. He didn't need to tell me what was inside. I already knew. Every detail of Terrence's lies, the money he stole, the threats he made. Every bruise, every silent cry, every fear-filled night. It was all documented now. Attorney Green handed me a crisp envelope. "This is the letter," he said. "It's going to Terrence. It explains the filing, the protection order, and the consequences if he attempts to contact you." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was calm, professional, but firm. It left no room for negotiation. No room for excuses. I read the words slowly, savoring each one. "They will respect your boundaries," Attorney Green said quietly. "You've done everything by the book." Tears pricked my eyes. Not from fear. Not from anger. But from relief. Relief that the nightmare I had lived under for nearly 2 decades was finally being named, confronted, and contained. Driving back to Margaret's house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The streets of Charleston passed by, the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees like whispers of encouragement. I thought of Terrence, of how shocked he would be to realize that the woman he had beaten, manipulated, and tried to destroy was now untouchable. Not because of him. Because of me. I returned home. Well, the home I had technically lived in but had not truly inhabited for months. and placed the letter in the mailbox. I didn't watch him open it. I didn't need to. He would read it soon enough. And when he did, he would understand one undeniable truth. I was no longer afraid. That night, Margaret and I sat on her porch swing, the warm night air brushing my face. "I feel lighter," I admitted quietly. "Good," she said. "You deserve this." I nodded, letting the tears flow freely this time. Tears not of fear, not of pain, but of release. Every night I had spent hiding, every morning I had spent pretending, every silent dinner and every forced smile had led to this moment. And for the first time, I felt the word that had been impossible to feel for so long. Safe. In the days that followed, I started reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried. I reorganized my closet, donated the clothes that reminded me of control and submission, and kept the pieces that reminded me of strength. I returned to the library, not just as a librarian, but as Vanessa Clark, the woman who had been beaten, ignored, and silenced, and yet had found her voice. Children asked me questions, colleagues smiled at me, and the quiet pride that settled in my chest was sweeter than anything I had ever known. And each night, as I sat on Margaret's porch with the wind brushing my hair, I whispered to myself, "I am free. I am whole. I am me." The morning after the letter was delivered, I woke before dawn, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I had a quiet sense that things were shifting, that the calm I had felt on Margaret's porch the night before would now ripple through the life I had once thought I'd lost. I didn't check the mail immediately. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight creeping across the floorboards, fingers wrapped around my coffee mug. The aroma of rich, dark coffee was grounding, almost sacred, and I let it fill my senses. Then I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, not angry, but firm, persistent. I opened the door. Terrence stood there, face pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open like he had forgotten how to speak. His usual confident stance was gone, replaced by hesitation, disbelief, and, dare I say it, fear. He tried to speak first. "Vanessa, we need to." I held up my hand. "No," I said. My voice was soft, but it carried the weight of every night I had been silenced. "You don't get to talk. Not today. Not ever, unless it's through the proper channels. You've had years of warning. Now you have consequences." His lips pressed into a thin line. His hands trembled slightly. For a moment, I thought I might be seeing a side of him I had never known, the side that realized he had underestimated me. I didn't step aside. I didn't flinch. I simply let him stand there, facing the reality he had tried to bury beneath intimidation and anger within the week. I started hearing from neighbors, colleagues, even distant friends who had somehow sensed a change. Small things, text messages asking if I was all right, concerned glances, quiet conversations. One morning at the library, a coworker approached me. "Vanessa, I heard about everything. I just wanted to say you don't deserve any of it. You've been so strong." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The words touched me, but more than that, they reminded me that truth has a way of rising, no matter how deeply it's buried. A week later, Terrence finally reached out through his lawyer. He wanted a meeting. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted control. I agreed. Not out of fear. Not out of weakness. But because I needed closure. When I arrived at the neutral meeting room, I could feel my pulse in my ears. I walked in slowly, letting my eyes meet his briefly, just enough to remind him who I was now, the woman he could no longer intimidate. He tried to speak first. "Vanessa, I didn't know." I cut him off gently but firmly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And now, we're going to finish this properly." The meeting lasted hours. Legal papers, signed agreements, protections put in place. Each signature I made felt like a brick removed from a wall that had been pressing on my chest for decades. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a lightness I hadn't known since before I'd met Terrence. It wasn't victory in the dramatic sense. It was quiet, steady, resolved. I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need recognition. I didn't even need his acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I had reclaimed my own life, and that was more than enough. In the weeks that followed, I focused on the small joys I had long ignored. Baking again, the smell of butter and sugar filling the kitchen. Walking through the streets of Charleston, noticing the old houses, the oak trees, the Spanish moss, and the beauty I had overlooked for so long. Rediscovering laughter, the kind that bubbles up naturally, unprompted, unforced. I allowed myself to remember that life could feel gentle, even after pain. that the world still had color, even after darkness. Most importantly, I realized something I never allowed myself to see before. Strength is not loud. It does not need to shout to exist. It manifests quietly, persistently, and in the moments when fear threatens to consume you. But you choose to act anyway. For the first time in 18 years, I understood what it meant to truly be free. The week after the meeting with Terrence, life seemed almost normal. Almost. The neighbors noticed, of course. Small gestures, a wave from across the street, a quiet good morning from the lady who ran the corner cafe, a coworker lingering a little longer at the library checkout counter. Each one reminded me that I wasn't invisible anymore, that the invisible chains had been broken. Yet the whispers followed me. Charleston is a small city in the grand scheme, and news travels faster than the tides that roll through the historic harbor. Some people knew the details of Terrence's cruelty, others only guessed. Either way, I could feel the shift. People looked at me differently, not with pity, but with recognition. Respect. One afternoon, a woman approached me at the library. She was about my age, smartly dressed, eyes kind but serious. "I heard what happened," she said softly, almost apologetically. "And I just want to say, I admire your courage. You've inspired me to speak up about my own situation." I blinked, startled. You mean it?" She nodded, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. "Yes. Sometimes we forget that telling the truth can save not just ourselves, but others too." Her words struck me like a bell. I realized then that my journey, painful as it had been, could ripple outwards. That the darkness I had endured could ignite light for someone else. Returning to work fully, I noticed the little details I had neglected. The smell of old books, dust and ink mingling in the air. The chatter of children discovering stories for the first time. The warmth of the library lights in winter afternoons. I began organizing events, story hours, reading groups, small talks on empowerment and resilience. I didn't advertise myself as a survivor, but I didn't hide it either. A woman in the back of one group whispered, "I'm glad you're here. You make me believe we can all rise." I smiled, feeling the first true sense of purpose in months. Margaret called one evening. Her voice was calm, but full of anticipation. "Vanessa, you need to see this," she said. I drove to her house, curiosity prickling my nerves. On her porch, she handed me an envelope. Inside were clippings from the local newspaper. Terrence's actions, his threats, the legal filings were now public knowledge. People were talking. Comments online, letters to editors, whispers in the streets. The man who had tried to silence me was now the subject of collective awareness. I held the clippings, a strange satisfaction washing over me. Not revenge, exactly, but justice. Quiet, undeniable, and public. That night, I sat on my own porch, cup of tea in hand, watching the Spanish moss sway gently in the breeze. I reflected on the journey. The bruises that once marked my body. The silent tears that stained my pillow. The meals I served with trembling hands, pretending all was fine. The days of fear that had made me feel small. Now all of that existed as memory, not as a chain. I realized that standing up had not just been about defeating him. It had been about reclaiming me. The next morning, I prepared breakfast for myself. Not for anyone else. Not to appease a tyrant. Not to mask fear. I baked biscuits, scrambled eggs with cream, and made a pot of strong coffee. I set the table by the window, sunlight spilling across the wooden surface. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the forced smile of survival. Not the careful smile of appeasement. The real one. The one that came from deep inside. And I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "I survived. I am whole. I am free." After the clippings from Margaret, life seemed quieter, yet somehow louder at the same time. It wasn't the clamor of gossip, but the hum of recognition, the subtle acknowledgement that I had endured something unimaginable and survived. I began noticing small things again. The sunlight through the shutters, the scent of wet earth after a summer rain, the gentle creak of the old oak rocking chair on my front porch. It was as though the world, which had once seemed so heavy, was now giving me permission to breathe, to exist fully. Without fear, I reached out to old friends I had drifted away from over the years, the ones I had quietly avoided because I was ashamed or simply too tired to explain the bruises and fear. The response was immediate and warm. Calls, texts, invitations to coffee. They didn't judge. They simply listened, held space, and reminded me that I was never truly alone. One evening, as I sat sipping tea with Linda, my oldest friend, She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've always been strong," she said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Back at work, I threw myself into creating a space that reflected my new sense of purpose. Story hours became a safe haven not just for children, but for adults seeking solace between the shelves of well-worn books. I began introducing a subtle theme in my readings, stories of courage, resilience, and finding strength in adversity. I didn't announce it as my personal journey, but people began to sense the depth behind my voice, the quiet conviction in my words. Parents came up after sessions, thanking me for sharing wisdom that seemed almost beyond the pages. And each time, I realized that my suffering had given me the ability to guide others, not through preaching, but through presence. Terrence attempted contact a few more times, though his letters and calls were distant, careful, calculated. I never responded directly. Instead, I let the law handle the edges he tried to manipulate. Each time he reached out, I felt a flicker of old fear, but it quickly transformed into calm. I knew my boundaries, and more importantly, I knew my strength. It was liberating to exist in the same city as someone who had once held my life in their hands, yet feel untouchable. I began returning to the small joys I had neglected for years. Morning walks in the historic district, listening to the quiet rhythm of Charleston's streets. Baking breads and sharing them with neighbors, letting the scent of butter and yeast carry my presence through the neighborhood. Gardening again, tending to roses and hydrangeas that bloomed in defiance of neglect, much like I had. Each act, mundane to an outsider, felt like a declaration of survival. I had taken back control of my world, piece by piece, breath by breath. Eventually, I began writing. Not for fame, not for sympathy, but to give words to what I had endured. I wrote letters to myself, to the younger Vanessa who had been afraid to speak. I wrote essays and reflections that slowly began to coalesce into something meaningful, a testimony of endurance, resilience, and hope. Each sentence was a balm. Each paragraph a reaffirmation. I had been broken, but I was rebuilding. And I would continue to rebuild, indefinitely, patiently, gracefully. By the time spring arrived, the bruises were gone. The physical marks healed, yes, but the deeper scars, the kind that lingered in memory, had begun to fade as well. I walked through my garden one morning, sunlight catching the dew on my roses, and realized I had survived my own nightmare. I had reclaimed my life. And I had quietly but firmly discovered a power I had never known I possessed. I was free. And more importantly, I was ready to live, not cautiously, not silently, but fully. Weeks turned into months, and life began to take on a rhythm I had almost forgotten. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't pretending. I was simply existing, fully, deliberately, without apology. Terrence faded from view. His attempts at contact became less frequent, more hesitant, until eventually they stopped altogether. I realized then that justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the knowledge that you are untouchable, that your life, once threatened, is now yours entirely. It wasn't fame. It wasn't fanfare. But slowly, I felt the community's eyes on me, not with pity, but with respect. One afternoon, as I walked to the library, Mrs. Reynolds, a retired teacher, stopped me. "Vanessa, the way you've handled yourself, it's remarkable. You've turned pain into something powerful, something real." Her words were simple, but they struck deep. They reminded me that the world notices courage, even when it doesn't make headlines. One day, a letter arrived at the library addressed to me. Inside was a note from a woman I had never met, who had heard my story through Margaret. "I don't know you," she wrote, "but reading what you've done gives me hope. I was thinking of leaving my own abusive situation, and now I know I can. Thank you for showing me strength. Even in silence, you are loud." I held the letter to my chest and cried. Not out of fear, not out of pain, but out of a deep, resonant joy. My actions, my quiet stand, had given someone else a spark of life. I continued to make the library a place not just for books, but for healing. Story hours became discussions about resilience, courage, and reclaiming one's voice. A young mother came to me one afternoon, eyes full of tears. "I needed to hear this today," she said. "Thank you for sharing, even indirectly. You've helped me find my strength." I smiled, understanding that my personal journey had evolved into something far larger than me. The library wasn't just a place of learning anymore. It was a sanctuary. Even as my life stabilized, there were still moments when fear tried to creep back in. the lingering memory of bruises, the echo of his voice, the anxiety that once consumed me. But now, when fear appeared, I faced it head-on. I reminded myself of every step I had taken, every quiet action, every careful plan that had brought me here. I realized something profound. Strength isn't the absence of fear. Strength is moving forward despite it. I redecorated the house slowly, carefully. Each choice was deliberate. Colors that brought warmth, textures that soothed, spaces that reminded me I was no longer living in a world dictated by fear. The dining room table, once a place of tension, became my sanctuary. I hosted small dinners with friends, sharing food and laughter instead of tension and anxiety. Every dish, every set of hands folding napkins or passing bowls, reminded me that life could be beautiful again. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. One morning, Margaret and I sat on her porch, tea in hand, watching the sun rise over the moss-draped oaks. "You've come so far," she said softly. "I don't know if you realize how far you've come." I looked out at the sunrise, colors spilling across the sky like a promise. And I realized she was right. I had survived, yes. I had endured, yes. I had taken back everything he had tried to steal from me. My dignity, my peace, my life. And now, finally, I was free to be myself. Fully. Completely. Spring had fully arrived, painting Charleston in soft shades of green and gold. The air carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine, a reminder that life moves forward, whether we are ready or not. For the first time in years, I felt that forward movement in my own chest, not just in the world around me. I started taking small trips alone, walks along the Battery, afternoons spent at the local coffee shops, sketching in notebooks, writing down thoughts I had once buried in fear. One morning, I walked down Church Street, past the old brick buildings with ivy curling along their edges, and I realized something. I was noticing things again. The colors, the light, the way laughter spilled out of cafes like music. Life had textures I had forgotten to see. Every small freedom, holding my own cup of coffee, choosing which streets to walk, deciding how to spend my day, felt revolutionary. These were the small victories, the quiet wins that no one could take from me. I also reconnected with distant family members who had no idea what had been happening behind closed doors. Aunt Clara invited me to her garden one Sunday afternoon. We sat on her porch swing, sipping lemonade, and talked about everything and nothing. "You've changed, Vanessa," she said softly, eyes scanning mine like she was trying to read the depth of what I had endured. "And I'm proud of the woman you've become." Her words weren't just comforting, they were affirming. I realized that reconnecting, being seen by family who genuinely cared, was part of reclaiming my identity outside of fear. At the library, I began mentoring younger women and teens quietly, helping them navigate challenges, speak their truths, and discover their own strength. One afternoon, a teenage girl stayed behind after story hour, nervous but determined. I think my dad is controlling me," she said, voice trembling. "I don't know what to do." I listened carefully, offering guidance without judgment, sharing strategies to stay safe and assert independence. Watching her walk away with a lighter step, a newfound confidence, reminded me that my experience, painful as it had been, could create ripples of hope. Terrence never returned. I received word through legal channels that his attempts to manipulate had been officially stopped, and the relief was profound. I took a quiet moment one evening to visit the empty spaces in the house that had once felt suffocating. I walked through each room, touching surfaces, breathing in memories both bitter and sweet. Instead of anger, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had survived, that I had endured, that I had finally reclaimed my story. One morning, I found myself sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the historic rooftops. The Spanish moss hung like silent guardians in the light breeze. For the first time in years, there was no fear in my chest. No lingering tension, no invisible chains. Only peace. I realized that the power I had been seeking all along wasn't about revenge, proving someone wrong, or public acknowledgement. It was about living fully, freely, and with self-respect intact. I whispered to myself, softly, almost like a vow. I am here. I am whole. I am mine. And in that quiet moment, with the city waking around me, I believed it completely. By now, life had settled into a rhythm I had long thought impossible. Charleston's historic streets, once shadows of anxiety and fear, now felt like the backdrop of my liberation. Every corner, every oak-draped sidewalk reminded me that I had survived the storm and was learning to dance in the sunlight afterward. One evening, a local women's group invited me to speak about resilience and overcoming abuse. Standing in front of the room, I felt a mixture of nerves and certainty. My lip no longer split, my cheek no longer bruised, but the scars beneath my skin carried wisdom that I could now share without shame. I know what it feels like to be trapped, I began, my voice steady. To feel invisible, to wonder if anyone will notice your suffering. But I'm here to tell you, your voice matters, your life matters, and your strength is already inside you. As I spoke, eyes glistened across the room. Some women nodded in recognition, others let tears roll freely. And in that space, I realized that my pain had transformed into purpose. The next week, a young woman came to the library, carrying a notebook and hesitant hope. "I heard you speak," she said, voice small but determined. I need someone to listen. Can you help me figure out how to stand up for myself?" I nodded, recognizing a mirror of my younger self in her eyes. We spent hours talking, planning, and finding strategies that wouldn't just protect her but empower her. Her smile when she left, confident and brave, became one of the many small victories that reminded me why surviving mattered. Back at home, I focused on reclaiming physical and emotional space. The dining room table, once a site of tension and fear, became my sanctuary. I hosted brunches with friends, tea for neighbors, and quiet evenings of journaling. I took pride in the small rituals, folding napkins just so, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, pouring tea with care. Each gesture reminded me that life could be tender, nurturing, and mine entirely. Even the library, which had always been a safe place, now became a canvas for my renewed life, a place where stories, voices, and courage intertwined. Though Terrence had faded into irrelevance, the memories of abuse sometimes tried to surface in quiet moments. An old sound, a sudden memory, a fleeting shadow of fear. But now, I faced them without trembling. I allowed myself to acknowledge what had happened, name it, and release it. I had learned that healing isn't forgetting. It's reclaiming your story and refusing to be defined by someone else's cruelty. I rediscovered simple joys. Morning walks beneath the Spanish moss, feeling the sun on my face. Baking breads and sharing them with neighbors, delighting in the smells of cinnamon, butter, and yeast. The laughter of friends filling rooms that once echoed only with tension. Each small joy was a reminder that life could be gentle, beautiful, and full of warmth again. Most importantly, I understood that the strength I had cultivated wasn't just about surviving abuse. It was about thriving afterward. I no longer waited for validation from others. I no longer sought permission to feel safe or to feel joy. The world was full of challenges, yes, but I had learned to meet them on my own terms, with grace and confidence. And in that realization, a quiet power settled over me, a power that no one could ever take away. Autumn arrived with soft winds and amber leaves drifting along Charleston's historic streets. There was a crispness in the air that matched the clarity I now felt within myself. Every breath, every step, reminded me that I was no longer defined by fear, by bruises, or by someone else's cruelty. I started making decisions solely for myself. Breakfast became a ritual of celebration instead of survival. I cooked dishes I loved, fluffy buttermilk pancakes, eggs with fresh herbs from my garden, coffee strong enough to wake the soul. And I ate them without hesitation, without apology. I spent my mornings walking through the city, notebook in hand, jotting thoughts that once would have been drowned out by fear. And when I laughed fully and freely, it was not for anyone else's comfort. It was for mine. The lessons I had learned in survival extended into every part of my life. I cultivated boundaries that protected me, not walls, but gentle fences that reminded others how I expected to be treated. Friends who had taken advantage of my silence no longer received access to my energy. Those who supported me, who respected me, became part of my inner circle. It was freeing, realizing that boundaries weren't punishment. They were self-respect manifested. Mentoring younger women became one of my greatest joys. I remember sitting with a mother whose husband had controlled every aspect of her life. She cried quietly, ashamed, afraid. "I don't know how to leave him," she whispered. I held her hand, looked her in the eyes, and said softly, "You've already survived more than you realize. You have the strength inside you. It's time to let it out." Watching her first steps toward independence reminded me that my story wasn't just mine. It was a torch I could pass along, a reminder that courage can ripple outward in ways you never expect. One Saturday morning, I took a long walk to the harbor. The water reflected the sunlight like shards of gold, and the distant sound of seagulls mixed with children's laughter from the nearby park. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Unshakable, unguarded joy. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, like the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and let the warmth of the sun and the breeze fill every corner of me. For the first time in decades, I was free, not just from fear, but from the memory of being powerless. In that quiet moment, I understood. Freedom isn't about making someone pay for their cruelty. Freedom isn't about revenge. Freedom is about living fully, without shame, without fear, without apology. And that realization settled over me like a soft, protective cloak. I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. My house, my routines, my friendships, they were all mine to nurture. I began planning small adventures, visits to places I had once dreamed of, writing letters to friends, reconnecting with family. Every choice, every decision, carried the weight of someone who had fought to reclaim herself and refused to let anyone take it back. I was ready to embrace life, fully, fiercely, and without compromise. Winter approached Charleston with a gentle hush. The streets glimmered with frost in the early morning sun, and the world seemed quieter somehow, as if it were giving me space to breathe, to exist fully, to rebuild. I had redecorated my home in subtle ways that reflected the life I now wanted. Warm tones, soft textures, spaces that invited comfort instead of fear. The dining room, once a place of tension, now hosted friends for brunches, laughter spilling into the walls like sunlight through the windows. The library, my sanctuary of learning and growth, became a hub for mentorship and community gatherings. Every object, every gesture, every ritual became a statement. This life is mine, and I will honor it. I reconnected with my neighbors and fellow librarians, discovering a network of support I had long forgotten. Together, we organized book drives, community reading hours, and workshops for young women navigating difficult family situations. Their smiles, their trust, their willingness to open their lives to me reminded me that healing is not just personal, it is communal. It is about letting others in and letting yourself be seen without fear. No longer did I wake with dread. No longer did shadows of Terrence's cruelty follow me through my home. I learned to sit with silence, to feel peace in moments that once would have been filled with tension. I drank my morning tea slowly, savoring the warmth, the smell, the comfort of my own presence. I cooked meals with intention, folding the napkins, arranging the flowers, letting each act of care be a celebration of survival and self-respect. I began to write my own story, not just as a memoir, but as a guide for others. Letters, journals, short essays, even speaking at community events. I wanted women to know they are not invisible, they are not powerless, and their voice matters. I had survived not only the fear and abuse, but also the silence. And now, that survival became a beacon for others. One evening, I sat on my porch, the Spanish moss swaying gently, the distant hum of Charleston life surrounding me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt it, the absolute quiet strength of a woman who has reclaimed herself. No one could take this from me. Not fear, not violence, not shame. I had learned that life could be beautiful again, even after pain so deep it seemed unending. I whispered to myself softly, I am whole. I am free. I am here. And I am enough. For the first time in a lifetime, I truly believed it. I want you to pause for a moment and take a deep breath with me. Think about everything you've endured, every fear you've carried quietly, every time you doubted yourself because someone else tried to define your worth. When I look back on my journey, the bruises, the silence, the nights spent wondering if I'd ever feel safe again, I realize now that every tear, every moment of fear, was part of my strength building quietly beneath the surface. Pain doesn't make you weak. Surviving it and learning to live fully afterward, that's power. I'm sharing my story because maybe, just maybe, it will remind someone out there that you are not alone. Maybe it will spark a little courage in someone who has been silent for far too long. Maybe it will let you know that freedom isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life, one small, deliberate choice at a time. So I ask you, where in your life do you need to take that first step toward yourself? Is there a truth you've been afraid to face? A boundary you've been too scared to set? A moment where you need to choose yourself, unapologetically? If my story moved you, if it made you feel a little lighter, a little braver, or a little more seen, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what city you're watching from. Your voice matters. Every story shared reminds someone else that they, too, can heal. And if you want to continue hearing real-life stories of courage, survival, and triumph, stories that show how women reclaim themselves after pain, hit that subscribe button. We have many more tales coming, each one a testament to the human spirit, resilience, and the quiet power of standing up for yourself. Remember, my loves, you are strong. You are seen. You are worthy. And no one, not fear, not cruelty, not doubt, can ever take that away from you. Would you have had the courage I found in that quiet morning, that decisive breakfast? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your heart.